Hello and welcome to our second lecture of this term. So today we are going to look at Mahmoud Darwish poetry. And in order to do that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how poetry can work as a vehicle of resistance. Poetry, they say, is more unconscious than prose, although it's deeply edited and chiseled language. Is made into an essence. And so at the same time that it's very unconscious and it has to do with what is difficult to put into words because it's dealing with emotions and deep feelings. But at the same time, when it's connected to a political idea and a cause, it kind of strengthens and amplifies it. Poetry and art cannot become didactic in the sense that they are not just political statements. That's not art, that's kind of policy or PR. At the same time, if the regime of representation is one of dissent, is one of the no saying, it's one that requires a sort of a breaking of the familial notions of what is correct and what is not, then that becomes artistic in itself. Why? Because what has our policed mental preconception has received, now it breaks because of this new intervention in reality. That's the poem. Okay, so I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint for today on Darwish. You were allowed to choose the poems that you want to analyze yourself. So 3 poems of choice from the collection. Unfortunately, it was Paradise. And this idea of playing with a volume of poetry is very ancient. People used to open books of poetry and just read a random poem so that they could kind of gain an interpretation and insight into their own lives. So this idea of picking up poems randomly is not something new, actually. It's very telling. So what are motifs in poetry? Motifs are images and ideas that recur, are motifs, and they're very important. There's a lot of repetition in poetry. The idea of a rhythm and sound in music, how it's the rhythm and sound is repeated, just like a lullaby that soothes. The same thing happens in poetry as well, which is deeply connected to the voice, the sound, and to the music of words. So the style, the surface level beauty of the poem is almost as important as what it's trying to say. So the meaning and the style, the form, are kind of a one unit. You can't say something that has a beautiful meaning, but it's written in common language, and language that's not maybe twisted and it doesn't have any source of aesthetic beauty. That couldn't be really a poem. So there's the idea of repetition, and the mind does not like repetition. We talked about this in The Little Prince, how the fox required a repetition of a tradition for a bond to be created. And in poetry, we look at the repetition of sounds, the repetition of images, the repetition of emotions, and it intensifies the emotion. It focuses on that certain image or idea, brings attention to it. So that becomes really crucial. So pay attention to what is it a word? Is it an image? Is it a figure of language that's being repeated? Yeah. What is being repeated and why? Always ask the question, why? So here, some of the motifs in Darwish's poetry are biblical references on why he's writing about Palestine. Palestine, this lost homeland of his. And this is the land where the 3 great world religions originated from: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They are not that they all originated from there, but they are deeply invested in the Holy Lands. So what recurs is a lot of references to biblical stories, Genesis, to the biblical characters, Abraham, Moses, the mosque, all of that. Another thing that we see a lot in his poetry are references to olive trees, olive branches. Now here we are dealing with symbols, but a symbol that is both universal and personal. So we talked about the fact that symbols are kind of images that are universally acknowledged to mean something. And we interrogated this idea of universality in our previous text. We said that, well, although usually, for example, fox is related as a symbol of cunningness in literature, but here we have taken a personal symbol. We have put a personal twist on it. We look at it as a symbol of friendship, for example, in the past text that we read. So olive branch, what is it a symbol of? It's usually a symbol of peace, right? The dove carries an olive branch. It's a symbol of peace and security, cessation of war. However, in the context of Palestine, that we are going to read a little bit of its history as well, the olive branch is also the sustenance, the land. Why? Because a lot of the people are olive farmers. And what happens during war is that, well, of course, the invading army will take that sustenance away. Those trees, olive trees, have been en masse uprooted from the land. So people, farmers, poor farmers, usually are mourning the loss of these trees. So although the olive branch is a universal symbol of peace, in the context of Darwish poetry, it becomes something to grieve for. It's peace and also a reference to war as well, and occupation. So it's more than what it's universally referred to. It's something personal and geographic as well, because it's the fruit of that region, and it's a fruit that's been, I have images of it being uprooted by the army. See, more than 800,000 olive trees have been uprooted, and it's kind of a strategy of war to do that. So something that has been universally acknowledged as a symbol of peace is now a symbol of torture of the poorer parts of the population. Okay, another motif that comes up in Mahmoud Darwish's poetry are references to roots. What does it mean to have a root? Again, it's a kind of tree metonymy. It's a part of another metaphor. However, at the same time, so we are dealing with roots of culture. So you said the root of three world religions are there in the land. At the same time, the root of Palestinians who have been uprooted are there. And once you cut the tree, although the root is in the land, the tree dies. So most likely it will die. So this idea of root, he plays with that. This is a word, a metaphor that's so commonly used that we kind of forget its references. And so to revive it and to bring it back to life, he has to use it in a new context. So here we are dealing with roots in the context of home and exile, to be uprooted from one's land. And what does it mean to be this nomadic, to live this nomadic existence where your roots are in one land to which you're never allowed to return, while your branches are in another? So the existence of the exiles. Another image that we see recurring in his poetry are the images of stones. And what do stones reference? Well, stones are strong, to start with. So stones are a symbol of strength. Also, stones are a symbol of Palestinian resistance against the Israeli army. Why? Because the kids, especially during the first and the second resistance, they had no weapons, only little stones that they could find on the street. So they would stand up against tanks and armed soldiers, just having nothing except stones in their hands. So it's a symbol of strength, but at the same time, it's a symbol of resistance of the poorer people of the world, some of the poorest people and most dispossessed people of the world. So it's something that references both strength and also lack of resources, but at the same time, resourcefulness to stand up for their rights against an invading army. Another thing that stone brings to mind is the idea of a patient stone. And I don't know if you're familiar with this image in poetry and in literature. The idea of patient stone is that stones cannot talk, right? They can tolerate. They are a symbol of strength. So they have been a symbol of something that's patient. And they can listen to our grievances without breaking. And so this idea of a patient stone is the stone that heard so many grievances that at the end of the narrative, it just breaks. So that's the idea of a patient stone that listens but does not respond. So it's patient. Okay, so the patient stone, and also resistant, and also as a weapon. So these are the three manifestations of what stone means for Darwish. If you come up with other interpretation of the stone, please do let us know. An image that comes up again and again in his poetry are the images of birds. And what is the significance of a bird? So imagine that human beings have drawn these borders on the map. And these borders are imaginary. If you look at the landscape, you see mountains and bodies of water and, bodies of land, but there are no walls, right? A lot of the borders are imagined geographies. However, those are very important in curbing and stopping the movement of population, especially the movement of refugees and asylum seekers from one country to another. Those borders have been drawn by war and blood, and without documentation, without passport, a lot of the refugees of the world, the displaced people of the world, are not allowed to pass those imaginary borders. So they're stuck in limbo land because, for example, Palestine is not recognized as a country. It's kind of a state. So it doesn't have a lot of people don't have passports. So how do you move between the borders? Now that's where the image of the bird comes in for the displaced. The bird moves between land and water without any need for any documentation. The bird flies over these man-made, insignificant stoppers of movement, right? So the bird becomes a symbol of freedom and flight and denying these borders their right to stop human beings from achieving and getting asylum and help. So a lot of the diaspora wish that they had wings because all that stops them from gaining a right to live are these borders. So bears, that's where bears come in, a symbol of freedom of movement, okay? The idea that we can soar above these borders of blood. And we are not incarcerated. We are free to move and mobile. So these images come up again and again in his poetry. So he died relatively young at the age of 67, but in the meantime, he published so many books of poetry. Very prolific poet and author as well. He wrote an autobiography about his life in exile. All of them are haunted with one idea, the loss of Palestine. What is that? So how does this unconscious vehicle of writing, which is poetry, how does it become political? How does it become a vehicle of resistance? Well, he was born in the village Alberwa. It was raised later by the invading army, and there's no trace of the village left any longer. So if you go there now, it's just a city. and it doesn't exist anymore. All the inhabitants of that village had to flee for their lives. They lived as refugees in Lebanon. He lived in Israel for some time, worked for a literary magazine related to the Communist Party. Now, where is Palestine? So you see this little tiny dot between Middle East, yeah, right there to the west of Middle East. And so that's, it's very small on the map, but it's very contentious. The red parts are Palestine and the white are Israel. So after the war, so you see in the left, 1946, the green part was Palestine and the white was what is now called the Israel. 1947, you see, okay, after the war, those lands were settled, okay? They decided this is Israel, that's Palestine. But then what happened is that Palestine started to shrink. So there was a lot of land grabbing. Even after the borders were recognized by the United Nations, to the extent that right now, you see on the far right, see Gaza on the left, which is the world's largest open-air prison. The city is under siege. Nothing is allowed to go in or out without military permission. And on the right, there is the West Bank. These two parts of Palestine are not even allowed to communicate with one another. So that's what happened. That's what Darwish is bemoaning. So in Nakba, in 47, 48, millions of Palestinians had to flee their homes on foot because they were shooed out of their lands. So this idea of occupation, the country remained, or the nation, under military siege until 1966. And what happened is that there were a lot of restrictions on freedom of organization, movement, assembly, speech, even singing. So there were a lot of laws that would curtail these activities. The cities were cleansed and the villages were destroyed. They were forcefully exiled. Writers and cultural leaders, they were isolated from other Arab states. There were not even libraries in the villages. They weren't allowed. Until 1960s, publications were severely limited. Okay, so this is an image of Gaza, the city under siege. And so resistance starts, resistance through art, through street art or public art. For example, Handala is this little guy whose author was killed, tortured and killed later because he created this little character. So he would just draw cartoon images of injustice, and then just this little kid. As you can see, he's poor, his clothes are patched, he doesn't have shoes, but he's watching, just this idea that we are watching. So Darwish became stateless when he joined the Liberation Organization in 1973, and he was banned from ever entering Israel again. So we said he's a very prolific writer, and he writes about many things that are close to his heart, such as, just this land, which is so beautiful and so historic, but at the same time is being devastated because of the war, because of the occupation, because of this land grabbing that's going on illegally. So the sustenance of most of the people are through farming and fishing. Also, fishing has been stopped because they don't want access to open water so that they would get some sort of aid from international bodies. So fishing has stopped. So they only have the farming, and the farming has, you see, the tractors and bulldozers, they take off trees from land. And so resistance with stones, you see standing in front of tanks with a little stone. But at the same time, you see in Bethlehem, for example, where Jesus was born, every year, there's a large population of Christian Arabs living there. And even the Pope visits the sites. It's a sacred site for all the three world religion. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that's happening in such a small town in the world. Let me stop share with you. So we have poetry that has reached us through translation. So it's obviously lost its layers of beauty, because usually poetry in the original is more sonorous, it's more rhythmical, more lyrical. But the fact that Darwish's poetry survives not just moving from one language to another, just attest to its beauty and its depth of meaning. Okay, so we are going to look at one of his poems now together. And what you're required to do is to do a close reading of just one of the poems. So if you could point to other metaphors, other similes, other symbols, other tropes in his poetry that even I haven't mentioned here in this short lecture, you're more than welcome to do so. This is just a sample of how to look at his poems, also a little bit of a context about the historical background of his poetry. But overall, you're welcome to take different angles on his work. So let's see if I can share with you. No, I can't share with you my. Let's see here. I'll read one of his poems. I have it open here, but I don't know why. So it doesn't let me share my. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So, where should the birds fly after the last sky? The earth is closing on us, pushing us through the last passage, and we tear off our limbs to pass through. The earth is squeezing us. I wish we were its wheat, so we could die and live again. I wish the earth was our mother, so she'd be kind to us. I wish we were pictures on the rocks for our dreams to carry as mirrors. We saw the faces of those who will throw our children out of the window of this last space. Our stars will hang up mirrors. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? Where should the plants sleep after the last breath of air? We will write our names with scarlet steel. We will cut off the hands of songs to be finished by our flesh. We will die here in the last passage. Here and here our blood will plant its olive tree. Okay? So, first of all, when you read a poem, just try to read it out loud. The words that we read fast in our head and the words as we speak them have a different essence and existence to them. We need to hear the sound of the words in order to appreciate what the poet is trying to do. Okay? So make sure that you read it slowly and out loud. I know it sounds silly if you have roommates or if you're outside on public translate, but even if you can whisper it a little bit, listen, so you will notice what comes up. Without that, you can't. So what is the poem here is trying to do? We do have some of the images that we talked about, but the idea of mother we didn't discuss. So land as mother. Why is land and mother connected? Why are they connected? What do mothers do that land does as well? The idea of giving, the idea of flourishing, giving birth, giving life to greenery, to trees that bear fruit, the idea of bearing fruit, all of these things, and the idea of having a homeland, a mother language. Mothers as their character symbolizing love at the same time as something that we want to get away from to grow, but then we want to return to that eternal love. So this idea of a journey, all of those things are in existence, both in the idea of the concept of the mother and also the land. And here Darwish is referring to this motherland that he wishes it was kinder to them. So the poetic persona, yeah, we read it. I wish the earth was our mother, so she'd be kind to us. And we commonly believe that the earth is kind of like a mother, but he says that it's not. It's as if it's not. It's not a kind mother. I wish it was kind to us. Why? Because the poetic persona is talking about the concept of exile, being thrown away, having to cut limbs to pass through this passage. We don't know exactly what this is to pass through, but probably being forced to migrate and leaving behind limbs. So although we leave behind the homeland, it's not as if we left in one piece. Always limbs, parts of our body or parts of our minds are there, to which we cannot return, because even if we return to the physical space, it's not the same sense of security and belonging that we originally had. I wish we were its weeds so we could die and live again, you know? So it's saying that the people who are displaced are even less than the wheat of the land, because the wheat, what happens is that, well, we use the wheat, but then the seeds grow back and there's new wheat. So there's this idea of regeneration and these cycles of life, but that has been severed and cut. So we don't have access to that. So who will throw our children out of the window of this last space? So it says we saw the faces. So looking at the face of another human being, but knowing that these faces might actually not be afraid to kill us and our children. It's just that moment of, you know, the break of the imagination. It's a very horrific moment. The idea that we will write our names with scarlet steam, and the fact that our blood will plant its olive trees. So these olive trees that are a symbol of peace and are growing while feeding on our blood. So referencing to the gore and the blood of the war, that land is growing with remembering what happened. So that was an example of a poem, how you could first of all go about dissecting its different elements and noticing what speaks to you more. So let's say you want to focus on this idea of the mother or the child. You want to focus on this idea of the tree. So you just focus on one of the concepts that interests you and you try to expand it. You don't have too much space. You just have one paragraph. You don't have a whole essay to write, but situated, quote the poem, the line that you're referencing, try to explain it. If you have read other poems that also deal with that concept, you're more than welcome to reference that as well. Focus on one, but then use other texts comparatively. You use them to draw evidence from them, okay, to prove your point. So that's your activity for Wednesday. So you can do a close reading of one of the poems, focus on any of the concepts that you like, and try to come up with your thesis, your argument. If you have any questions, of course, you're always welcome to email me. And so all you have to do by Wednesday before midnight is to write about one of the poems of Darwish. And the next 2 classes have been canceled because of Congress. So Congress is the largest conference of the humanities and social sciences in Canada. And this year we are hosting it at York. So if you can participate, there are many different and interesting panels and also artistic activities that are going on campus. End of May and beginning of June. So between May 27, June 2, if I'm not mistaken. So do visit the Congress homepage and see if you can participate, collaborate, help. Anything you can do is interesting. Next, it's going to be years before York gets to host this event again. So because of Congress, they have decided that on those days, we are not allowed to have any sort of teaching. That's why from the beginning, syllabus was designed like that. However, I did forget the public statutory holiday today, Monday. So that's why our lecture is pre-recorded as opposed to synchronous. However, all the other Mondays, as stated on the syllabus, are going to be synchronous. Your participation matters. And we learn in circles. Lecturing usually is not done dictatorially. I don't dictate and you write down. I want to hear your point of view. I want to hear what spoke to you and why. So always have your intimate initial reaction regarding a poem, a work of art, literature that we study. Secondly, ask yourself why. Why did that concept speak to me? Look elsewhere, look at the other works, look at what you read in the past and try to see if you can connect them. Okay, so that's all we do. And this helps our cognitive, intellectual skills to grow. That's how we grow intellectually, by thinking clearly, writing clearly. Okay. As always, reach out. If you don't have a question, you're good for Wednesday before midnight. Post your paragraph and give feedback to 2 of your peers. I'll see you the Monday after Congress. I'm going to post that on eClass so you know clearly what you're going to do next. Be well. Bye.